My name is Adriana Morgan. I'm 34 years old, and 6 years ago, I was a decorated officer in the U.S. military until everything was taken from me. Branded a traitor, abandoned by my own family, I disappeared without a word. But silence doesn't mean surrender. This is the story of how I came back. Not for revenge, but to bring the truth into the light. You're not on the list, ma'am. The words, though politely spoken, cut like a blade. The doorman didn't blink. His black suit matched the sheen of his earpiece, his posture stiff like a soldier. But it wasn't military discipline that held him upright. It was training. Paid, precise, and meant to keep people like me out. I tilted my head slightly. Could you check again? Adriana Morgan. He glanced down at the iPad in his hand, then back at me. I'm sorry, that name is not on the guest list. I reached into my bag, pulling out the crisp ivory invitation. It was engraved in gold foil. Sophie Morgan and Matthew Carver cordially invite you. I handed it to him without a word. His eyes scanned the card, lips twitching. Then, with a breath, he turned it toward me. Red ink. My name, Adriana Morgan, was slashed through with a thick, vicious line. Underneath, in small letters, someone had written, "Revoked." I'm going to have to ask you to leave the gate, miss, he said, more firmly now. My grip on the card loosened. The wind took it. It fluttered once before landing at the edge of the gravel path like discarded trash. I didn't argue. Didn't plead. Didn't shout. I only smiled, a strange, soft thing that never reached my eyes, and turned. Behind me, the wedding roared. Strings swelled from the white canopy beyond the garden. Glasses clinked, laughter spilled into the spring air like perfume. Lush roses framed the stone archway, and somewhere inside, Sophie Morgan was about to become Sophie Carver, America's darling with her husband from the Carver Empire. The entire scene was magazine perfect. Too perfect. I took a slow step toward the black SUV waiting at the curb. A valet boy hesitated, watching me as though unsure whether I belonged anywhere at all. That wasn't new. No one ever asked why I left 6 years ago. They just nodded along when my mother said, "The family doesn't need people who dishonor the military." Funny how they never cared what dishonor really meant. I opened the door of the SUV. Inside, the silence was heavy. A fine leather case lay on the seat beside me. I reached over and opened it. A general's uniform, flattened and pressed, lay inside. 4 silver stars gleamed from the shoulders. I had earned every single one. No one in the mansion behind me would believe it. Because to them, I was the daughter who vanished. The girl who walked away. The one who didn't fight for the Morgan name. But they were wrong. I didn't fight for the family. I fought because they tried to break me. And failed. My reflection stared back at me from the tinted glass. The suit I wore was clean, tailored, minimalist. Nothing like the shimmering gowns inside. But power doesn't wear sequins. It wears silence, discipline, precision, and revenge. I opened my bag. A small black USB stick lay inside, labeled in silver Sharpie. Walker. Confession. I held it for a second, fingers running over the plastic edge. A voice echoed in my memory, trembling and low. I had no choice. They paid me $200,000 to sign it. I didn't want to lie, Adriana. My jaw tightened. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was a war. I slid the USB back into its case and tapped twice on the driver's seat partition. The SUV moved, gliding away from the mansion, the music growing fainter with every turn. Behind me, the past sparkled with its false gold. Ahead, the truth waited like a sword. They didn't invite me because they thought I couldn't come back. But I didn't come to celebrate. I came to end things. The general's stars glinted again in the soft spring light. And somewhere in my mind, the red-inked name burned brighter than ever. This time, they would remember it. You don't have to be dead to be buried. That sentence haunted me more than the verdict. I remember whispering it to myself the night they stripped my rank. That night, America buried me. Not under soil, under silence, under shame, under the suffocating weight of betrayal. The courtroom wasn't a courtroom. It was a stage. No gavel slammed, but every pair of eyes slammed judgment harder than a hammer. A narrow panel of military brass sat stiffly behind their desk, not daring to meet my eyes. They didn't need evidence. They had the headlines. They had my mother. Behind me, the room was packed. Reporters, flashes, shadows, and family. Diana Morgan sat in the third row, flanked by PR agents. She wore black. Not because she was mourning, but because it looked respectable on television. And it was on television. Major Adriana Morgan is hereby dishonorably discharged with immediate effect. The words echoed inside my skull long after the courtroom emptied. My mother had spoken just before the verdict, not in my defense. No, never that. She stepped forward, lips pursed, tone clipped and clear for the cameras. I have no more daughters in the military. She turned before I could meet her eyes. She turned, and with her went everything I once stood for. 2 days later, Sophie went on a morning talk show. She cried. She dabbed her cheeks and said, "It's so hard. I still love my sister, but I can't condone what she did." The host leaned in, sympathetic. The audience gasped on cue. And just like that, Sophie Morgan became the face of public grace and family pain. While I became the villain. No trial, just exile. The word betrayal was stamped in red across my personnel record. They took my rank, my pension, my identity. I left Washington, D.C. with one bag and a phone with no contacts. The Pentagon was a building I once belonged to. Now, even its shadows wouldn't hold me. I went west. I didn't plan it. I just kept driving. 3 days later, I found myself in Idaho, outside a town so small it didn't show up on most maps. A man named Rick gave me a job fixing trucks in his garage. I didn't tell him my last name. I told him I used to be logistics. Rick didn't care. As long as the engines ran and I didn't talk much, I was golden. For 2 years, I never looked in a mirror. I couldn't face the woman in it. Not until the night I heard a knock. Quiet, slow, and deliberate. I opened the door. Thomas Hayes stood outside, wearing a worn brown coat instead of his uniform. His hair was grayer. His eyes were the same. Tired, measured, sharp. He used to be my CO, the only man who'd once tried to challenge the charges. He'd forwarded me a single intercepted email during the trial. That email disappeared. So did he. Until now. He didn't say hello, just stepped inside, looked around the small rented room with its cracked floorboards, the pile of manuals and socket wrenches beside my bed. "You survived," he said. I nodded. Then he handed me a file. Thin, black, unmarked. "I couldn't stop what happened," he said, voice low. "But I can give you a way forward. If you want your honor back, you have to take the road no one knows about." I stared at him. "Why now?" "Because," he said, "the truth finally has a crack in it." And then he left. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened the file. Photos, coordinates, names I hadn't heard since the operation that supposedly leaked, and a ticket. No airline logo, just a time and a location. At 2 a.m., I walked to the edge of the airstrip behind town. A helicopter waited in the dark. Black, silent. I hesitated for 1 second. Just one. Then I climbed in. The blades roared to life. The ground fell away. Through the fogged glass, I saw the tiny garage, the town I'd used to hide from the world. It shrank behind me like the version of myself I no longer needed. We rose into the sky, and I whispered under my breath, "They buried me." But I was learning how to dig myself out. I used to believe the man who betrayed me was a stranger, a faceless operative, a bureaucrat buried behind red tape. But monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they salute. Sometimes they say thank you. Staff Sergeant Neil Walker had once stood before me after a mission in Kandahar, sweat on his brow, dust on his uniform, and gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks, ma'am," he'd said, voice rough. "You pulled me out when no one else would." 2 years later, he disappeared the day my scandal broke. No explanation. No farewell. Now I knew why. His voice haunted the clip Marcus Dean sent me. I was just following orders. The money came from a company called Caldwell. I couldn't say no. They threatened to kill my daughter. I replayed it again in the silence of the outpost in northern Jordan. The room smelled of metal and adrenaline. The desert wind pushed against the walls like a beast trying to crawl in. Across the table, Thomas Hayes didn't blink. He'd heard it too. "Caldwell," he muttered. "We finally have a name." "Liam Caldwell," I said. My hands curled into fists. I had heard that name before. Briefly, months ago, on a list of donors at a gala Sophie attended. It hadn't meant anything then. Now it was a detonator. Hayes slid a new file toward me. Thick. Crisp. The Caldwell Corporation, listed as a cloud computing firm with military tech contracts. A corporation with hundreds of layers, shell companies, offshore accounts, and 2 private jets. But the real man behind it all? Liam Caldwell, CEO, fiancé of Sophie Morgan. He had never met me, never spoken my name. And yet, 6 years ago, he'd paid a soldier to ruin my life. Why? I would find out. But first, I had to finish the job. 3 weeks earlier, I had dropped into Syria to extract a scientist from a chemical weapons depot before a rogue cell could silence him. The mission was classified. No one outside our unit even knew the man was American. His name was Dr. Leo Sharp. And before he died, bleeding out in my arms, he slipped a USB drive into my hand. "Give this to someone who can expose them," he whispered. "It's all on here. Caldwell, the algorithms, the diversion funds." He died 2 minutes later. I carried that drive back across the border in a hidden compartment sewn into my boot. Now, in Jordan, I plugged it in. Hayes and I watched as the files unfolded. Encrypted logs, transaction reports, a deep dive into accounts masked through a firm registered in the Caymans, and every trail led back to Caldwell Corporation. Back to Liam. It wasn't just the money. It was everything. Coded algorithms that mimicked Pentagon communications, falsified chains of custody, an operation called Silencer. In the files, I found my own name. Tag, Maverick. Status, neutralize. Risk level, high. They had built an entire system to take me down. Not because I was a traitor, but because I got too close to something. That classified leak I was blamed for? It was never about the documents. It was about the contracts. Multi-billion-dollar fraud, masked as national security. And I had stumbled on it. I looked up at Hayes. "Did you know?" He shook his head. "Number, I suspected there was more. But this?" He tapped the screen. "This is treason at the highest level." "Worse," I said, my voice cold. "It's personal." That evening, Marcus Dean arrived at the base. I hadn't seen him since the day I vanished from DC. He looked older, paler, but his eyes still held that same flicker of defiance. "I kept this for 6 years," he said, handing me a flash drive. "Didn't know if I should send it, but when I heard you were alive, I figured you'd want it." The file opened with a click. Neil Walker's voice again, this time more raw. "Caldwell paid me. I didn't know it would go that far. They promised no one would get hurt. But then, they said if I didn't sign the report, they'd take my daughter. I swear to God, I didn't want to." The clip cut off mid-sob. Walker had been a pawn. I leaned back in my chair, my breath shallow. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was betrayal orchestrated. And the man behind it would soon marry my sister. Late that night, I sat alone. The lights were low. The desert wind had quieted. A file folder lay open in front of me. Inside was a yellow envelope. Familiar. I pulled it out. Sophie's wedding invitation. The same one I had once held at the gates of Morgan Mansion. My name was there, crossed out in red. Again. I stared at it for a long time. They had erased me. 6 years ago. And now again. But this time I had names. I had voices. I had proof. They buried the wrong woman. The war was coming back home. And I was bringing hell with me. I wasn't invited. But this time, no one had the power to stop me from walking through that gate. No more silence. No more exile. No more lies wrapped in white lace. The Morgan Mansion gleamed in the spring sunlight, drenched in opulence, exactly as it had been 6 years ago. Velvet drapes hung from polished archways. Fountains sang softly under sculpted marble angels, and beneath a grand floral arch stood my sister Sophie, radiant in designer white, hand entwined with the man who tried to destroy me. From the gates, I could see it all. The rows of dignitaries, the tight smiles, the media lenses capturing every curated moment. A show. Just another illusion. But not today. I took my first step forward. The guards at the entrance noticed me, then stopped. Their eyes traveled from my face down to the 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder. The uniform fit me like a weapon. Every thread pressed, every badge earned. One whispered into his mic. The other stepped aside. I didn't break stride. Inside the garden, violins swelled. Guests turned to admire the setting. But then, one by one, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the seated crowd. The cameras turned slowly. The band faltered. Then silence. In the center, Sophie blinked. Her grip on Liam's arm tightened, her jaw clenched. My mother, Diana Morgan, froze like marble. She hadn't aged much, still pristine in pearls and pride. But the moment she saw me, a flicker of something old returned. Something terrified. I kept walking. My boots struck the stone with the quiet force of inevitability. 1 step, 2, 3. Liam Caldwell straightened his shoulders, trying to regain composure. But I saw his fingers twitch. He recognized the uniform. The stars. He wasn't ready. Good. I passed rows of diplomats and business moguls. Not one greeted me. Most weren't sure if I was part of the ceremony or its destruction. At the third row, I nodded to General Dawson, a retired Marine with a chest full of medals. He stood up slowly and saluted me. I returned it. Then I stepped onto the aisle. Sophie took a step back. Adriana, what are you doing? I brought a wedding gift, I said. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need to shout. Truth doesn't beg for attention. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out the black USB, held it up between 2 fingers. This contains a voice confession from a man named Neil Walker, a man paid by Caldwell Holdings to fabricate evidence and frame me for treason. Murmurs exploded across the seats. Liam stiffened. Don't do this here, he muttered. Sophie looked at him. Liam? Adriana turned to the guests. 6 years ago, I was stripped of my rank, cast out by my family, labeled a traitor to this country, but I never leaked anything. I was targeted because I stood in the way of someone's profit. She paused, then walked to the audio station at the edge of the aisle, slipped the USB into the speaker system. A trembling voice played. I was just following orders. Caldwell Holdings wired the money. I didn't want to ruin her life. I didn't want to lie, but they threatened to kill my daughter. Liam Caldwell gave the order. Gasps. The audience froze. Diana's hand flew to her mouth. Sophie stared at Liam, trembling. Is that true? Liam backed away slowly. You don't understand. She's twisting it. This isn't... Click. Another audio clip. The plan was simple. Make it look like Adriana leaked mission intel. Blame her. Discredit her. Remove her from the picture. She got too close to the Caldwell defense contract audit. I turned toward Liam. You erased me, I said. But I'm still standing. And I brought the receipts. His eyes darted to the cameras, some now filming, others streaming live. Then he snapped. Fuck, you actually recorded it? I tilted my head. And it's live streaming, I said calmly. More gasps. A few guests stood up. Phones rang. An aide from the Department of Defense pulled out a radio, already barking into it. Sophie staggered back. You were behind it all? She whispered, staring at Liam. He didn't respond. He turned, bolted down the aisle. I didn't chase him. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about truth. I walked to my mother. She looked up at me, eyes glistening. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't ask, I replied. Then I walked away, past the frozen cameras, past the whispers, past the unraveling ceremony. The wedding was never for me. But justice was. I was handcuffed before. Dragged through corridors of judgment without a single voice asking, did you do it? Today, I would watch that question fall on the right man. The wedding chaos was still echoing through the garden, murmurs rising like smoke from a smoldering stage. Guests clustered in confusion. Cameras flickered with urgency. Sophie was nowhere near the altar anymore. And Liam? Liam Caldwell had vanished from the public eye. But not from mine. I saw him slipping toward the back of the estate. Panic had replaced his carefully rehearsed confidence. He walked fast, but not fast enough. I followed, each step measured. Past the marble steps, past the pool, past the orchard where we once played hide and seek as children. And there it was, the old greenhouse. Once it smelled of basil and thyme. Sophie and I used to sit there as girls, pretending we could grow anything. Now, it smelled like dust and endings. He stepped inside and turned, startled. Why are you following me? I thought we should talk, I said, voice even. He glanced around. There's nothing to say. Oh, I think there is, I said, stepping in. One last confession. Off the record. Or not. He scoffed. You really think this stunt changes anything? A soldier's confession? That's nothing. I shrugged. Yet you're sweating. Funny for someone innocent. He paced, rubbing his hands together. I should have laundered the money through Dubai, he muttered. Damn it. The Cayman account was too traceable. Click. I touched my brooch. A soft LED pulse blinked red. He froze. What is that? A gift from an old friend, I said. This entire conversation is being recorded. He lunged toward me, face flushed. You bitch. I stepped back, calm, and live-streamed. Silence fell like glass shattering. His mouth opened, then closed again. At that exact second, boots crunched the gravel outside. The greenhouse door creaked. 4 figures entered. Black suits, tight earpieces. The lead one held up a badge. Liam Caldwell, the agent said. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and subverting national security protocols. Liam stepped back. You can't do this. This is private property. 2 agents moved in. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He thrashed once, then stopped. His eyes darted to mine. You set me up. No, I said, voice low. You set yourself up. I just made sure the truth showed up on time. The lead agent turned to me. General Morgan, thank you for your cooperation. I nodded once. As they escorted Liam out, I followed. Outside, the wedding guests had gathered near the pathway. The music had long died. Photographers lowered their cameras to watch, stunned. And there, in the middle of it all, Sophie. Her veil hung limp on one shoulder. Mascara streaked her cheeks. She didn't move, didn't scream, just stood there, watching. The man she had chosen, the future she had built, all unraveling before her. Liam turned his head as they dragged him past her. He opened his mouth, maybe to lie, maybe to beg. But Sophie looked away. The agents pushed him into the waiting black car. The door slammed. Justice didn't scream. It simply arrived. The cameras didn't miss a beat. This wedding would be remembered, but not for the vows, not for the dress, for the downfall. I turned to leave, but Sophie's voice stopped me. Adriana. I paused. She took one shaky step forward. Her hands trembled. She reached out and gripped the pastor's wrist, almost for balance. Is it true? She whispered. Do you still have his apology letter? I didn't answer. Not yet. But I looked at her. Not with hate. Not with triumph. Just the weight of everything she had once been to me. And everything I had to become. Because of what she chose to ignore. Then I walked past her. Toward the gates. Toward the next truth. The wedding was over. Not in the way people expected. With rice, with toasts, with laughter under chandeliers. Instead, the aftermath smelled like spilled wine and wilting roses. White chairs stood crooked on the grass. Tablecloths were crumpled, stained with forgotten glasses and footprints. Inside the great hall, I sat alone. The 4-star uniform weighed on me, but not with burden, only presence. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was louder. I glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. My ride would arrive in 15 minutes, just enough time for the ghosts to come in. And they did. Diana entered first. Her pearls were still around her neck, but they looked less like jewelry and more like a noose of pride. Sophie followed. No veil, no glamour. Just the echo of what she'd almost become. They stood across the room as if unsure whether they were welcome. I didn't say anything. I waited. It was Diana who spoke first. Her voice was brittle but clear. I didn't ask because I didn't want to know the answer. A confession, but not an apology. I nodded once. So you chose to believe the one who paid? Diana flinched. Her fingers curled against her side. Sophie took a step forward. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I knew, she said. Not all of it, but enough. I knew Liam was involved. I knew the scholarship fund for Ethan was fake. But I didn't want to lose what he gave me. I let it happen. I didn't move, just reached into my coat pocket and laid 2 things on the table between us. The first, a copy of Ethan's forged acceptance letter. The university had never received his application. It was a bribe, part of Liam's quiet campaign to appear generous. The second, a letter from Liam, addressed to me. An apology, dated 2 months before the arrest. If this ever reaches you, I'm sorry. It was never personal. You were just in the way. Sophie stared at the letter. Her breath caught. Her shoulders crumbled. I'm sorry, she whispered. Truly. I finally looked at her. I used to think an apology would fix everything, that if the truth came out, the cracks would seal themselves. I stood, but now I know. Admission is enough. Forgiveness isn't my duty. It's yours to carry. Sophie burst into tears. She dropped into the nearest chair, covering her face. Her wedding dress sagged like an abandoned curtain. Diana turned her back to us. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. No sharp words, no speeches, just silence. I left the letter and the scholarship forgery on the table. I didn't need them anymore. I walked past them both. As I reached the door, a small voice called out, "Excuse me." I turned. A little girl in a white dress stood near the doorway, holding a melted cupcake in one hand and a tiara askew on her head. Her eyes were wide, curious, unafraid. "Are you in the military?" she asked. "I want to be like you." I knelt to her level, smiled. I reached up and unclipped one of the silver stars from my shoulder, placed it in her palm. "I'll do better than that," I said. "You'll be more than me. Stronger, smarter, kinder." Her fingers closed around the star like it was a treasure. I rose and stepped outside. The car was waiting. Thomas Hayes stood beside it, arms folded. No uniform, just a knowing look. "They'll spin the story, you know," he said. "Public opinion, media wars." I shrugged. "Let them try." He opened the door. "You've got a decision to make. They want you back. A full command. Classified operations, you'd lead it." I looked at him, then toward the sun-drenched trees beyond the gates. "No," I said. He didn't argue, just nodded. "Where will you go?" he asked. I paused. "Somewhere quiet," I said. "Somewhere I don't need a uniform to prove who I am." The engine started. As the car pulled away, I glanced once more at the mansion. The scene of my exile, my return, and finally, my release. I didn't need forgiveness. I needed peace. And now, I had earned it. The mansion that once silenced her voice now echoed with the sound of justice served. What was meant to be a glamorous union became a reckoning, where masks fell and truth took center stage. Because justice doesn't come when it's convenient. It comes when someone dares to speak. Like a tide breaking through stone, the truth cannot be buried forever. Sometimes surviving isn't enough. Standing up becomes the true victory. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And comment one if you felt every moment of her fight.